Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, regional challenges. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry visits China with cooperation and conflict in the Asia-Pacific high on the agenda. And Vietnam's future as Hanoi decides on its leadership for the coming years. We look at Vietnam's internal challenges and its place on the world stage. We start our program with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry's visit to China. Key issues on the agenda including nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula and the ongoing disputes in the South China Sea. Many see Kerry's visit as a gesture toward improving trust between Beijing and Washington.
Representing two great powers. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry at the Great Hall of the People. Xi spoke in glowing terms about China-U.S. cooperation, while Kerry praised China's role in countering extremism, managing climate change, and restraining Iran's nuclear program.
China
and the U.S. have very good and timely exchanges on key international issues of Iran, North Korea, and Afghanistan. In general, I'm satisfied with the overall development of China-U.S. relations.
Kerry also met with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, with the DPRK nuclear issue as a key concern. Pyongyang's most recent nuclear test has sparked tension across the region. Both agreed the UN Security Council needs to take further action and pass a new resolution.
To achieve denuclearization, we have to take the path of negotiation and consultation. Sanctions are not an end in themselves. The key is to really resolve the issue.
The South China Sea disputes were also on the agenda. During Kerry's trip to Laos and Cambodia, he had called on the two ASEAN members to present a united front over China's activities in the region. But Cambodia proved reluctant to get involved. Wang urged the United States to play a constructive role in dealing with what he called sensitive issues.
China is firmly committed to maintaining peace in the South China Sea, easing differences through dialogues and settling disputes through negotiations and consultations. China and the United States should deal with the sensitive issues in a constructive way to ensure a good prospect for Sino-U.S. cooperation.
The Asia-Pacific remains a region of myriad security challenges. But while the U.S. and China have their own national interests, Kerry's visit may be a sign that both sides believe cooperation may be the only way forward.
And for more on John Kerry's visit to China, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Yuan Peng, who is the Vice President of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Welcome, sir. Yes. And also joining us in Washington, D.C., we are having Mr. Douglas Paul, Vice President for Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Welcome as well, Mr. Paul. First of all, it seems that the Chinese and American side are having different views as to the approach of how to guarantee the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. side, Mr. Paul, seem to believe in sanctions, but how much sanctions will eventually work? We are having difficulties hearing Mr. Paul at the moment, so let me go to you first, Mr. Yuan. What do you think of the approach?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, that U.S. and China will have same goals but different approach. Americans tend to use serious sanctions, and they trust sanctions work. But historically speaking, it seems that sometimes sanctions work, but some other times sanctions always failed. So China, we think we need both sanctions and negotiations. And the sanctions should be just polishing sanctions rather than just fatal sanctions. Because we and China and the States will have different goals. We think denuclearization should be balanced with peace and stability. But it seems that Americans put the denuclearization the first priority than everything else, peace and stability. But given Chinese relations with DPRK and geopolitical consideration, we're bound to balance between peace, stability, and denuclearization. So that's why we think sanction is okay, but first of all, should be under the UN platform, and secondly, should be just punishing rather than fatal sanction.
But what do you mean by fatal sanctions, sir? Before we have our American guest participating, I think the audio is not being fixed at the moment. So is it, for example, as the U.S. proposed, include the banning of DPRK planes to China, for example, including banning of oil exports from China to DPRK through some of the small pipelines from China? DPRK totally depends on that when it comes to fuel. And also, the U.S. was also proposing earlier about banning any kind of international banking interactions with DPRK. For example, those in Macau, as was the case many years ago. What do you make of these suggestions? Are they workable?
It seems that Americans think it's workable, but facts show that it doesn't work. That's why we see the third and fourth trial of a nuclear test by DPRK. So this time, American proposal is that cut off the oil export and banning air flight to Beijing from Pyongyang to Beijing, and banking sanctions. So all those, for me to see, is fatal sanctions. Think about that. No flight from Pyongyang to Beijing. No oil from Beijing to Pyongyang. So Pyongyang will feel highly isolated. So if one country feels highly isolated, what should they do? I think it will go even further. So different countries have different approach. We can see the South Korea, they think they want to have 5-party talks, the 6-party talks without DPRK, but American want fatal sanctions, and China still want to resumption of 6-party talks. So different countries have different approaches. So Chinese way is that we need really negotiation among different countries, find a common interest and a common approach.
And now I'm told that Mr. Paul can get through to us now. And Mr. Paul, what do you make of the different approaches? The U.S. believe in sanctions. You probably have also heard earlier from Mr. Yuan Peng the argument from the Chinese side why sanctions is not the end game, but rather negotiations should be.
Well, I'm sorry to say I couldn't hear Mr. Yuan the last couple of minutes. But on the question of sanctions, I'm not a big believer in sanctions myself. However, we've been through a very extended diplomatic process with North Korea. The Obama administration, by my count, has reached out 5 times diplomatically to North Korea and been seen its hand slapped back by the North Korean leadership 5 times. So there's a sense that the North is not getting the message. They need to be reminded that they're part of the international system and they have responsibilities to it. And the obvious source of influence on North Korea is China, which provides vital supplies of commodities and domestic consumption items, and and critical industrial items as well. And China has been very carefully limiting the scope of the sanctions, which have been authorized by the UN Security Council, using its position as a member of the Permanent Five, to limit that. In frustration, the U.S. has turned to stronger self-defense measures, some of which China does not like, and there's now talk of expanding the theater high-altitude air defense system in Korea. The previous nuclear test, the 3rd nuclear test by North Korea, led the U.S. to deploy anti-ballistic missile silos in 13 additional ones in Alaska and California that provide protection against the growing missile and nuclear threat from North Korea. And the U.S. will continue along this line. We're hoping to motivate China to do more to persuade North Korea. Now, it's not all sanctions. Remember back in 2010, there were a lot of tensions between North Korea and South Korea and with the international community. And at the end of 2010, the Chinese government took a diplomatic initiative with North Korea that brought us a considerable period of reduced tension. When Mr. Dai Bingguo traveled to North Korea in late 2010. I wouldn't rule out that kind of diplomacy making a difference too. I think working together, we ought to be able to find the right combination of carrot and sticks to deal with North Korea.
Mr. Yuan, do you buy what Mr. Paul just mentioned, that it has to be a combination of both carrots and sticks?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the balanced way. So sanction per se doesn't work, and the fatal sanction, will deemed to be failed in the last minute. And somebody want to make some comparison between North Korean sanction to Iranian sanction, but the case is totally different.
Why is that?
The Iran so far hasn't made any single nuclear test. The DPRK boasted that they have already been a nuclear country, so it's much harder for a nuclear country to give up existing power and existing achievement. So in this regard, I think we need to be more patient. We need to be more coordinated and be more foreign policy oriented negotiation.
What else can the United States do, Mr. Paul, in order to ease the tension on the Korean Peninsula and even to work with the Chinese side?
Well, I think there's plenty of room. We've talked about getting the 5 members of the 6-party talks together, excluding North Korea for a while, to see if we can't improve our diplomacy and the kinds of offers we make to North Korea to try to test their very unlikely willingness to limit or reduce their or eliminate their nuclear capabilities. The path forward for a while appeared to be that between South Korea and North Korea. We had the August agreement on reducing tensions after the North Korean provocation along the DMZ earlier in the year. And that seemed to lead us in a new direction. All of us, I think, at the end of 2015 felt that there was some movement toward a reduction in tensions on the peninsula. And yet the North, out of the blue, came up with this so-called H-bomb test, and I think undermined the premises of Beijing and Seoul and Washington that we had someone to work with. We now need to regroup, pull ourselves together, and see if we can find a combination of diplomatic initiatives and countermeasures that will give North Korea more reason to see that the calculus of continuing to develop the weapons is not going to lead them to a better place.
Is what Mr. Paul suggested as the diplomatic initiatives, for example, the 5-party talks, for example, the DPRK and ROK talks, or some kinds of negotiations, possible as China considers this?
No matter 5-party talks, 6-party talks, the key of those talks is U.S. and China cooperation. The past success of the story is based on U.S. and China cooperation. But today, the tragedy is that U.S. and China in quarrel, in disputes in many areas, in South China Sea, East China Sea, in American traditional allies, and in Chinese foreign policy. So I think DPRK is using the big power disputes to achieve its selfish goal. So today it's time for the United States to think about its rebalancing to Asia. What's the goal for that? Is to hedging against China or cooperate with China to maintain the peace and stability of the region. So I think that the recent DPRK, the 4th try, gave us an alert that it's time for U.S. and China to rebalance to the past good timing of the cooperation.
But Mr. Yuan, some would argue this is a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I mean, a DPRK issue could be one of the areas that the United States and China can work together and cooperate on, and therefore bringing better atmosphere to the other issues between the two countries. Or it could be the other way around. You wait until everything gets better before we go and work on the DPRK issue, which is quite a crucial issue. So many would say this is a chicken and egg thing. You cannot just say, let's make everything else better so that we can work on this.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a chicken and egg story. But first of all, I think we have some cooperation so far. Even if we have some disputes on the approach, but at least we have a dialogue between U.S. and China. We both agree to have some kind of a sanction under the UN Security Council, And the problem is that given today the distrust between US and China, given today the six-party talks, at least three of them, US, China, and Japan, has some disputes.
Right.
It's very hard to find some consensus and coordination in dealing with the same, hot spot. So I mean, on the one hand, we need cooperation in dealing with the urgent DPRK nuclear issue. On the other hand, it's alert to us that we need to resumption of the cooperation among the big powers.
Mr. Paul, do you think what Mr. Yuan just said makes real sense?
Absolutely, I think he's talking very sensibly. We've got some challenges. I think with the conversations between Foreign Minister Wang and Secretary Kerry the last 24 hours, we've seen that the U.S. and China have an agenda of items where cooperation has been good, like on Iran's nuclear program, fighting disease, fighting terrorism, climate change. And on other issues, we've got some sharp disagreements. The question is, how do we manage those sharp disagreements so that they don't infect those areas of cooperation, and maybe we can get to a point of starting to deal with those disagreements themselves. I'm not very optimistic that the next year is going to produce a lot of solutions. We're at the end of the Obama administration. People are winding down. They don't seem to have many good ideas on how to go forward, nor if they have good ideas, will they have the time in office to follow through effectively with them. And we have no idea who's going to be president next year in the U.S. and what directions the new administration will want to take. So I think it's important in terms of this political fluid environment that the U.S. focus on its long-term interests, and those are peace and stability in the region. Despite the fact we've had a big election in Taiwan that could have taken us down a bad path, so far the U.S. Council of Peace and Stability has been persuasive on the new leaders in Taiwan. I hope we can find ways of managing our South China Sea disputes in a more matter-of-fact way, with less public discussion and more private consultation, and come up with some initiatives to try to get those problems resolved by the parties concerned.
There's a lot of hope that you have just voiced, Mr. Paul. I did notice that. But on the other hand, there is something that is quite urgent. For example, there has been media reports suggesting that the DPRK might be in the near future testing a missile launch in the future. Of course, the Chinese Foreign Ministry have already responded to this, expressed concern about this. Nobody knows what time, under what circumstances, what kind of test, and whether this kind of news is exact or only speculative. However, this is a big concern. So I'm sure at times all of this debate will come back once again. If we don't have a solution now, we're going to do the same stuff once and again in the near future. Mr. Paul.
Well, the missile test is like ham and eggs for breakfast. It goes with the nuclear test. The nuclear test is designed to make a smaller warhead that will fit on a missile and then find a more reliable missile. They've been making steady progress. Some of it's been fake. The submarine launched missile show that was put on a month ago, we can pretty much say was a fake now. But some of these capabilities are real, and the U.S., as I said earlier, has, after the third nuclear test, introduced more ABM launchers, and I expect we will do more of the same. Again, China didn't like that, but the U.S. president is not going to tell his people that we're going to make ourselves more vulnerable in the hope that North Korea will move to a better path. We have to do something to try to incentivize North Korea to realize that it's going down a path that will not buy them the security they think it will.
Mr. Yuan, China seems to be caught in between. On the one hand, you got DPRK on the border. Yes, traditional ally, but China has told DPRK very clearly it has to stop what they're doing in terms of the nuclear test. However, it continues to do what it does. Yet, China is concerned about its security because it is in the neighborhood. On the other hand, the U.S. has continued to deploy, as Mr. Paul suggested, defense apparatus into the Asia-Pacific region, in the name at least of the threat coming from the DPRK nuclear issue to the neighboring countries also of China. So what can China do now? Is there a better choice? The longer thing prolonged is not in China's interest either at all.
Yeah, of course. I think in the near future, I think we'll see a very dangerous situation. On the one hand, after the fourth trial, some reports issue that DPRK will have the ICBMs launching or missile launch, which American consider much more than the nuclear per se, because it poses direct threat to the states. On the other hand, the American election season is coming soon. February the 1st, Iowa caucus is coming. So election season will make it some big story. And thirdly, in the coming March, the next nuclear security summit will be held in Washington, D.C. President Obama do want to do something in terms of dealing with the nuclear issue of the DPRK. So all those sensitive timing and issues make the situation even worse. So for China, as want to be a responsible big power, we do want to cope with this kind of urgent issue first, put the other issues the secondary. That's why I think Wang Yi and both Wang Yi and President Xi had a very constructive dialogue with John Kerry, and we hope that constructive U.S. and China dialogue provided the basic base for the future way to deal with the nuclear issue.
We hope that will be the case, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for now, at least for your insights and also your proposal of the solutions. Yuan Peng in Beijing, Douglas Paul in Washington, D.C. Thank you, really appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Vietnam's future as Hanoi decides on its leadership for the coming years. We look at Vietnam's internal challenges and its place on the world stage. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News, and now let's turn to Vietnam, where Nguyen Phu Trong has been re-elected as General Secretary of the ruling Communist Party. As Vietnam looks ahead, big questions remain over its ongoing economic challenges and its relationship with the United States and with China.
Continuity at the top. Nguyen Phu Trong won re-election as leader of the ruling party, securing his tenure for another 5 years.
I requested my retirement, but the party gave me a mission, so I have to take the responsibility as a member of the party.
Chinese President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory message to Nguyen Phu Trong. He praised Vietnam's ruling party and pledged to work with Vietnam towards peace, cooperation, development and prosperity in Asia and the world as a whole. Nguyen Phu Trong has a reputation for being economically conservative and pro-China, and has been chief of the party since 2011. His retention of power may effectively sideline his main rival. Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Thanh Dung was expected to run for the top post, but his withdrawal left Nguyen Phu Trong as the sole candidate. Nguyen Thanh Dung was seen as a U.S.-leaning economic reformer, credited with leading Vietnam's economic rise in the last decade. Though Vietnam posted one of Asia's fastest growth rates last year at 6.7%, and attracted record foreign investment, the country continues to grapple with economic problems. Mismanagement of state assets resulted in boom and bust cycles, dragging down the competitiveness of domestic firms and the country. According to official data, state-owned companies use almost 50% of Vietnam's public investment and tap 60% of the country's bank loans, all while contributing just a third of gross domestic product. Vietnam is also entering a period of change in foreign trade, as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major free trade deal, is expected to come into effect.
I hope the government will have better economic policies so our business can recover.
With both domestic and global challenges facing the country, the next few years will take skillful governance.
I think it's a difficult development for the party, but there are no another choice. Vietnam is nowadays deeply and fully integrated into the world economy.
Meanwhile, as tensions rise in the South China Sea, foreign policy will also be a major priority, along with balancing ties between China and the United States.
For more on this, the latest situation in Vietnam, we are joined in Beijing by Mr. Yang Xiyu, who is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. And also joining us from Singapore, we are having Mr. Lim Tai Wei, who is a research fellow adjunct at the National University of Singapore. Welcome, sir. And also from Washington, D.C., we're having Mr. Philip Crowley, former United States Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. Welcome as well. First of all, what do you make, Mr. Yang, coming from China's perspective, of Nguyen Phu Trong once again being elected as the head of the country?
I think this top leaders arrangement thoughtfully reflects the authorities' consideration of keeping continuity of the policies and keeping the political stabilities during the whole transitional period. So the top leaders' continuity is the base for the continuity of the political transition.
Mr. Yang, about another question about the new leadership change. Will the reform agenda change?
Well, the most dramatic and important changes of this Party Congress is the large scale of the reshuffling at the top level, say, political bureau of the party. For example, among the past 16 members of the political bureau, 9 of the 16 have been replaced, including the very famous politician, the existing prime minister, but now not the member of even central committee, let alone to the member of the political bureau. So many people focusing on the prime minister's going out of the political bureau. However, not only him, but also the other 8. So 9 of the 16 are replaced by the new faces. That reflects the transitional characteristics of the existing leadership. Say, on one hand, the top leader remain the same, but on the other hand, the major part of the body of the leadership has been replaced by the new figures.
Right. Mr. Crowley, what do you make of this political leadership change inside Vietnam, particularly the fact that Vietnam is also a member of the TPP and also willing to join China-led Maritime Silk Road as well?
Well, I think that just reflects both matters of geography and also matters of geopolitics. By geography, Vietnam is going to have a significant relationship, with China that has significant benefits. It also will create, frictions, as we've seen, in previous decades. And Vietnam has worked hard over the past 20 years to improve its relationship with the United States, and I think in part of that is as a balancing effort against a resurgent China in the region, and so I think economics will play a role in this. I think politics will play a role in this. I agree with my colleague that I don't think this necessarily signals a significant change on the policy front. It is fair to say that Vietnam is beginning the process of a generational change of leadership, and felt that continuity at the very top was appropriate at this time.
Mr. Yang, what do you make of Vietnam's position now? On the one hand, it is embracing its neighbors, for example, even China's maritime, but on the other hand, working with the United States on TPP, in which China is not a member.
The phenomenon you mentioned really reflects Vietnam's comprehensive goals, among which some of the goals are contradictory. For example, Vietnam has been trying every effort to improve relations with the United States towards a strategic cooperation partnership. But on the other hand, China remains the largest trading partner with Vietnam, although Vietnam has joined in the TPP. So many Chinese experts are really confident to say, no matter TPP conduct exclusive or inclusive policies, that won't matter for China because 10 of the 12 TPP members take China as a major trading partners. So in practice, it's impossible, for example, Vietnam can follow the so-called exclusive policy against China, the largest trading partner. However, in the political security area, like especially on South China Sea issue, Vietnam really want to make use of U.S. for their favorite. So basically, the picture for Vietnam policy is quite complicated, mixed.
It is. From the American perspective, how is Washington positioning Vietnam, Hanoi, at this moment? Because back in the 1960s, the Vietnam War was really one of those scars in the American history and memories. Meanwhile, later, Vietnam has embraced economic reform, including attracting more American investment into Vietnam. And now Vietnam has also become an important member of the TPP, in fact, one of the few developing economies. So, Mr. Crowley, how does Washington see Vietnam's position now, especially its position in Asia?
I think the United States has been very encouraging of Vietnam opening up its economy to the world, becoming more of a market economy. And in fact, as your setup piece indicated, the economic performance by Vietnam in recent years, it has overall been very, very significant, but it's had its ups and downs. I think the value of the TPP is to continue to help Vietnam on this path in terms of economic development, economic reform, and obviously Vietnam is going through some of the same challenges that China has gone through with its legacy industries, the inefficiencies that go with that, the cronyism that can go with that, and how it continues along this path of development. I think that by embracing the international standards that are inherent in the TPP, the United States believes that Vietnam can continue this advance and perhaps over time, level off and sustain a more constructive and predictable economic performance.
Mr. Yang, is Vietnam today China 10 years ago?
Many similarities, even nowadays. For example, the just past the Paris Congress, they put two focuses as the top priority: strengthening the party's construction and the fight against corruption. If you look at the political situation nowadays in China, quite similar. President Secretary General Xi Jinping actually has made the similar efforts. On one hand, strengthening the party's construction to make the party cleaner and more efficient, and on the other hand, launch a very brief and widespread anti-corruption movement. So now I cannot say, oh, Vietnam is following Chinese model, but in the history of the opening door policy during the past 3 decades, there are indeed some similarities, many similarities between Hanoi and Beijing policymakers. Although I'm not sure who learns who from, but the fact is, China really take the first step from the very beginning stage and now.
And now we are also joined by Mr. Lin Tai-Wai from Singapore. I mean, Mr. Lim, glad that we can talk now. What do you make as a member of the ASEAN country of Vietnam's new political realities? The president being re-elected and the prime minister seem to be not elected into the 200-member Politburo. What does that say to you as a neighboring country, as an observer of Vietnam for some time?
I think the election results are interesting. Perhaps there are 3 main points that can be discerned from the election. And the first point would be, it seems like there's a lot of investors as well as people who are observing Vietnamese politics that are quite pleased or content with the result, in the sense that the outcome of the election has provided some stability to what was previously guesswork as to who will win, the Trong faction or the Zong faction. And so there's a sigh of relief that this election is over, and some form of political stability and certainty has returned to Vietnam. And certainty and stability are good sort of qualities for investors in general. And the second point would be that Mr. Trong, who has been appointed as the new leader, is seen to be a consensus builder. because previously Vietnam is seen to have three main factions: the conservative faction, the liberal faction. Sometimes it is also divided into pro-West and pro-China, and also a moderate faction. But Mr. Truong's election seems to signal that there is some sort of a desire for consensus building, and he's seen to be a consensus builder who likes to work somewhat in the background, behind the scenes, to build unity and perhaps some consensus across the different factions. Now, Mr. Truong, the third point is that he's often seen as a hardliner, and maybe some have mentioned that he's pro-China. Some also mention that he's conservative. But regardless of the label, Mr. Truong is perceived and seen to be an architect of Vietnam's outreach to TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I see.
And in July last year, he has also visited the White House. Now, he's likely to be a moderate when it comes to TPP or economic reforms. He may be enthusiastic in certain ways, and perhaps much more careful in other ways.
Right.
For example, he's seen to be a little bit more careful when it...
Well, Mr. Lim, I'm sure we've got more chance to discuss his characters. But besides that, one of the other interesting things and important thing about what's going on inside Vietnam has a lot to do with what is going on, might be going on in the South China Sea, for example. Between China and Vietnam, there are territorial disputes. Also, Vietnam is a member of the ASEAN country. ASEAN as a whole is also talking to China on certain issues related to this. So what would that mean, Mr. Yang?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Vietnam has conducted complicated goals, comprehensive goals. But on South China Sea, I think the new leadership under the previous leader and the existing leader will be more cautious and careful to keep a balance between their national interests with a good relationship with China and the national interests on the South China Sea issue. During the past, sometimes there are some imbalance, so that makes some clashings between China and Vietnam. But now I think under the new leadership, they will inclining towards more cooperative through dialogues and negotiations rather than the previous way.
I see. Mr. Crowley, what is your expectation in that regard?
Well, I don't see this necessarily as zero sum. You know, I think that that both General Secretary Truong and Prime Minister Deng, want to have constructive relations, with China, want to try to resolve, points of friction peacefully, through negotiations. Prime Minister Deng, for example, was outspoken 2 years ago when there was the oil rig incident, a Chinese exploration, into what Vietnam considered to be its territorial waters. By the same token, he received in President Xi's recent trip, an invitation to come to Beijing. So I think there's balancing going on, in these factions, generally. But Vietnam has, I think, as many ASEAN members, welcomed the so-called rebalance or pivot by the United States, to the region, as a balancing effort. Vietnam has been a leader in what has been called the Lower Mekong Initiative, dialogue among many of China's neighbors, and I would expect that to continue under General Secretary Truong in the coming years.
All right, Mr. Lim, final words from you. Member of the ASEAN, with the new leadership change, or shall we say continuity of the leadership inside Vietnam, what can you expect Vietnam's role in ASEAN and, of course, its neighboring relations?
Well, as you know, on the 31st of December 2015, ASEAN has quietly formed the ASEAN Economic Community. And the desire of the ASEAN Economic Community is to be able to break down barriers to trade and services. and also to overcome other issues, for example, recognition of each other's educational qualification by educational institutions of various countries within ASEAN. So Vietnam, of course, is a very important component of this project of the ASEAN Economic Community. It will be a very long-term project, and Vietnam's participation would be very important.
I see.
And Vietnam has, of course, reached out to other Asian ASEAN countries, just as it tries to maintain this equilibrium between China and also the US. So I think Vietnam is playing this very precise calibration game, where it's able to maximize its national interests by integrating its economy and also its trade with other ASEAN countries with this new AEC or ASEAN Economic Project, while trying to maintain good relations with the major powers in the region.
Okay, Lim Tai Wei, P.J. Crowley, and Yang Xiyu. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.